Well, I never thought we would get body horror in a Christopher Nolan film, but here we are. The Odyssey is probably the most anticipated movie of the past decade, or maybe the past 5 years. Probably the most anticipated movie in a post pandemic world that I can remember, at least. And as you might have seen in one of my trailer review videos, I didn't really trust this movie going into it. I always had great faith in Christopher Nolan, and I had great faith in whatever it is that he puts out. But the trailers kind of took all the hype that I had up here and sort of brought it down a few notches, to say the least. My biggest concern was the dialogue because, I don't really know of any Greek person back then who said the word dad, and I especially didn't know any of them that said the word daddy. So when I heard that in the trailer, I was a little bit, I wasn't really thinking that it was going to be that good, despite the hype and despite that Nolan's name was attached to it, as well as every AAA list actor you've ever known. But I will say I was pleasantly surprised, and then some. This is definitely one of Nolan's more immersive films, and I know that, he's good at that kind of thing. It's not really his specialty, but this one in particular was quite immersive. And so that level of immersion through the dialogue, through the environments, through the action, through the set design, through everything, that actually was enough to cover up the dialogue, which they did not change, unfortunately. They still kept the dad, they still kept the daddy. They also dropped a few F words, which, is neither here nor there, I suppose, but that kind of took a little bit away from the immersion for me. It's like, well, I don't really think they had that word back then. And even if they did, the way that they actually used it in the movie was kind of cheesy and overreaching. But overall, the immersion, the overall experience of the Odyssey, of this movie, actually was enough to sort of overwhelm those complaints, those initial complaints of the dialogue and those sort of seemingly nitpicky but important things. The overall experience was enough to make you forget about those things or at least forgive them. Christopher Nolan's most favorite theme by far is the use of time, or how we interact with time, how time informs our perceptions, how time affects us. And so I was wondering if he was going to do any of that kind of thing with the Odyssey. And it seems that instead of now making movies where the general purpose of the film is to confuse the audience through time, Tenet was nothing more than an intellectual exercise in what the heck is going on. It seems like he's sort of found this equilibrium of, oh, I can sort of take this Tarantino-esque approach to it, a la Pulp Fiction, where I can just take this current scene and then suddenly we cut over here, but actually this scene was building up to this scene, so now you understand what you first saw a lot better. Oh, but now we're flashing back over here, and now this is going to tie into here, and now we have a story over here, and we forget where we even are in real time, and stuff like that. So it actually kind of kept your brain on its toes. And in fact, the scene with the Cyclops, which was great, by the way, was at first kind of confusing because it seemed like something would happen and then it would switch back, either cut backwards or cut forwards, because certain characters would die, but then they would be alive. And so I think maybe in that particular scene, Nolan was just playing with the idea of like, how would this actually work out in someone's head? This idea, how would it work out in their head? And then if it was a disaster, it would just cut right back to the present moment where they didn't in fact go through with that plan. At least that's what I think. Regardless, it was an interesting narrative idea to sort of keep the audience engaged, like to cut back and forth between different time periods and then bring them all together. Much like Dunkirk in the way that it was, switching from land to sea to plane and how it all ultimately interacted with itself. The performances overall were top-notch, particularly Anne Hathaway as the Queen. I thought that she did a great job. She had very appropriate reactions given the emotional weight of everything. I think that some characters are kind of lacking in that, including Matt Damon, including Tom Holland. I feel like there were some reactions that were merited of the situation that they were really underplaying. And I know that they're both experienced film actors, so I would imagine that it's a deliberate choice. But there were just some scenes where I thought, shouldn't you have like 10 times the reaction that you're having right now? Whereas Anne Hathaway seemed to match that. She is definitely subject to a little bit of overacting, Les Miserables being an example. But overall, I think that she brings the heat that's needed for such a weighty drama like the Odyssey. As was Robert Pattinson, the poor man who cannot get away from his Twilight roots, but is just I wish we could move on from that as a society. But in any case, he did a great job as that sort of like sleazy, manipulative bad guy. Christopher Nolan remains to have a vendetta against our eardrums. There were a few times where I almost went like this, and I wasn't even watching it in IMAX. It was just like noises that came from creatures. Also, all the yelling. The yelling was so loud. But I'm pleased to say at least that the music was tolerable. Probably because Hans Zimmer was not attached to this project, which was a little bit surprising. I feel like this is like right down Hans Zimmer's alley. At the same time, I know that he hasn't worked with Nolan in a while, so I guess that professional relationship is over. But in any case, the music was not too obnoxious at all. It was pretty bearable, and it was very exciting. The only little complaint I might have is that it had this this overall theme of like pumping, like you know. And I think as an audience member, or myself anyway, we're so used to that sort of building up to something, like you know, some like major theme is supposed to happen, but it just kept that sustaining like pulsation of excitement and terror in some contexts, which in and of itself I think is really exciting. I guess the first time I'm watching it, I'm just expecting it to like build into something, to like arrive at a point, but it just kept this like pulsating panic, this kind of like slamming fist on the door type music, which again, it was fun, it was exciting. I guess now that I know exactly what to expect, if I were to watch the Odyssey again, I would just sort of sit back and enjoy the music rather than waiting for it to arrive at some point. It was definitely more exciting than Oppenheimer. I know that that's kind of a hot take. I thought that Oppenheimer was the most boring Nolan movie I've ever seen in my life. So the Odyssey was definitely more exciting than Oppenheimer. It kind of was a little bit like Blade Runner 2049 in the sense that it wasn't like 100% thrilling and exciting. It didn't have these spikes of excitement and sort of more casualness. It was more so just like this sustained this sustained tension, this sustained amount of excitement with some spikes in it as well. But it had this ubiquitous and pervasive sense of urgency and this pervasive music. Like the music never stopped, which is kind of like a Paul Thomas Anderson style to sort of bring life to every scene. But since it had that the entire time, it kept your interest. I wasn't bored. I wasn't bored once. The only thing is that the very ending of this movie is a nice little bow tie. It's wrapped up very cutely, very they all lived happily ever after type, which I thought was kind of interesting considering the source material. I don't even remember actually how the original novel ends because I read it so long ago. But I just thought that perhaps Nolan could have taken a liberty and made it maybe like a little bit more ambiguous, or perhaps even like a little more tragic, given who the character is, given the setting, etc. But not a huge complaint, just one in which I wish it was maybe had a little bit more risk taking. So overall, I am pleasantly surprised with this movie. I didn't think that it was going to be bad. I just thought it was going to kind of be mediocre. But it is definitely good, and it's definitely probably even one notch above good. Check it out because it's a Nolan movie. Check it out because of the giant scope. Check it out because of the source material. Check it out because of the exciting action pieces, the acting performances, the music, all kinds of different wonderful elements. And I'm giving this one a solid 8.0 out of 10. So have you seen this year's summer blockbuster movie, The Odyssey? If you have, what did you think about it? Whatever your thoughts are, let me know down in the comments below. Thank you so much, everybody, for watching. I truly appreciate it, and I'll see you on the next cinematic adventure.